Little girl raised a grizzly cub. Years later, when they reunited, everyone was terrified. In the middle of a dusty wildlife checkpoint, a massive grizzly emerges from the tree line, its shadow stretching toward a young woman frozen in place. Soldiers grip their rifles, boots grinding against the gravel as tension thickens in the air. No one breathes, because the bear isn't charging. It's looking straight at her, as if it remembers. What happens when a wild beast returns for the one human it once trusted, and will it embrace her, or tear everything apart? The wind rolled across the dry clearing like a warning, kicking up swirls of dust that glinted under the harsh afternoon sun. Rangers were spread in a tight formation near the wildlife perimeter, their uniforms stiff, hands tense around their rifles. The noise of the crowd, tourists pulled back for safety, faded into an eerie silence as a massive shape moved beyond the fence line. Gravel crunched. Boots shifted. No one dared step forward. Among them stood a young woman in a faded red jacket, her posture rigid, breath caught halfway in her chest. She wasn't a ranger, and she didn't look like someone who belonged on the front line of a wildlife emergency. Yet every eye flicked toward her, as if waiting for her to react. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from something far more complicated: recognition. Years ago, long before armed guards and strict wildlife enforcement zones, she had stumbled across a tiny orphaned cub, barely able to stand. She had been just a child herself back then, small and fragile, but strangely fearless. The cub had been weak, starving, its fur patchy and eyes glassy with exhaustion. Most would have stepped back. She had stepped forward. In the months that followed, she had fed it from a bottle, wrapped it in blankets during cold nights, and whispered to it as if the forest might hear and judge her for interfering. Villagers warned her that wild animals didn't feel gratitude, only hunger. Wildlife officials ordered her to release it before it grew dangerous. But children don't calculate risk the way adults do, they hope. And hope made her believe that something wild could still choose loyalty. Eventually, under pressure, the cub was taken into official custody and relocated to a protected reserve. She had watched it go, chained by the helplessness of being too small to stop it. Reports claimed it adapted, grew strong, claimed territory. She tried to follow its trail through scattered mentions in ranger logs and whispered sightings near the river. But time moved brutally forward, and life pushed her away from everything connected to that memory. Until today. Now that same forest-born creature stood just beyond the clearing, no longer a cub, but a full-grown grizzly towering above the brush. Its breathing was slow, deliberate. It wasn't attacking, but it wasn't retreating either. It was simply staring straight at her, like it had been waiting all this time. The fence separating the secured zone from the wilderness rattled softly in the wind, the metal chain links clicking like distant keys being turned in a lock. The rangers held their position, scanning the tree line. The young woman's hand hovered inches from the boundary rope, as if some invisible force pulled her closer. One of the officers, his jaw tense, stepped beside her. "Step back," he murmured without looking at her. She didn't move. Her breathing was slow, her eyes fixed on the shape advancing through the brush. Leaves shifted. A heavy branch cracked under enormous weight. The ground seemed to vibrate slightly with each step. A murmur rippled through the line of onlookers. "Is that one of the tagged bears?" another ranger whispered. "No tag," someone replied. "Look at the shoulder. Wild male, no collar, no tracker." A wave of unease passed through the crowd. The bear emerged fully from the trees then, muscles rolling beneath its thick coat, fur glossy in the sunlight like burnished copper. Dust drifted around its paws with each deliberate step. The rangers instinctively raised their rifles, but no command was given to fire. The young woman's lips parted, but no sound came out. She took another step forward. "I said stay back," the officer warned. "It's him," she said quietly. The officer turned, confused. "What?" Her voice remained calm, too calm for the situation. "He shouldn't be this close to the fence. He's not here to hunt." "That thing weighs over 600 pounds, the officer snapped. "It doesn't need a reason." The bear slowed, its head tilting slightly. It didn't roar. It didn't bare its teeth. It simply watched, eyes locked onto the girl in the red jacket. Something flickered across its face, something unreadable but undeniably focused. A ranger near the far end of the formation swallowed hard. "Why isn't it acting aggressive?" "Because it's waiting," she whispered. The officer beside her frowned. "Waiting for what?" She didn't answer. Her pulse pounded beneath her skin, echoing like distant drums. She remembered the cub's heartbeat against her chest when she used to hold it, wrapped in an old flannel blanket. She remembered the sound it made when it was afraid, quiet, almost like a sigh. It had never roared at her. Not once. A radio crackled behind them. "Command to perimeter. If the bear crosses the boundary, authorization is standby. Repeat, standby." The ranger next to her lifted the barrel of his rifle just a little higher. "That means if it takes 2 more steps..." The girl stepped past the rope. Rifles snapped toward her instantly. "Stop!" the officer barked. "Are you insane?" She kept walking, slowly, her boots crunching softly on gravel. She didn't run. She didn't raise her hands. She simply moved forward as if approaching something she had lost long ago. The bear's ears twitched. Its shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. Dust swirled in the air between them, like the moment before a storm breaks. "Don't take another step," the officer warned again, his voice sharpening. "If it charges, we shoot." She didn't stop. Another ranger swore under his breath. "We'll hit her too. She's right in the line of fire." She took one more step and then stopped. Not from fear, from recognition. In the silence that followed, the wind shifted, blowing across the clearing, carrying human scent into the wild. The bear lifted its head, nostrils flaring, its massive paws pressed into the dirt, claws scraping against stone. It made a sound then, not a growl, not a roar. A low, resonant rumble that sounded more like a memory than a threat. The girl didn't blink. Behind her, rifles trembled in uncertain hands. "What is it doing?" a ranger asked, voice tight. The bear lowered its head, not in aggression, but in something dangerously close to acknowledgement. The ranger captain raised his hand. "Hold position. Do not fire until I give the order." The bear took one step closer. The girl took one step too, but this time, not forward. She stepped sideways, placing herself directly between the rifles and the animal's path. Someone shouted her name, but she didn't react. She was no longer looking at the armed men, or the fence, or the crowd holding their breath. She was looking only at the bear, and in that instant, the bear changed, its muscles tensed, not to retreat, to move. It leaned forward, a sudden shift, like the moment before a dam break. The officer's voice cracked through the air. "Stand by!" The bear lunged. The world snapped into motion the moment the grizzly lunged. Dust erupted beneath its paws, a deep thud shaking the ground as if something ancient had just awakened. The rangers reacted instantly, rifles locked into firing stance, fingers tightening on triggers. "Hold!" the captain shouted, but his command wavered under the pressure of instinct and fear. The girl didn't flinch. Instead, she took a single step forward and raised her hand. Not high, not dramatic, just enough for the bear to see the motion. A quiet gesture, the same small signal she used years ago whenever the cub grew restless and afraid. The bear halted, claws scraped over gravel, muscles rigid, breath pumping like a slow furnace. Its head tilted, eyes narrowing, nostrils quivering with a flicker of recognition buried under years of wild instinct. "She's controlling it," someone whispered. "No," another ranger muttered, voice low. "She's not controlling anything. It's deciding." The girl's chest rose slowly, matching the bear's rhythm. Every step she took was careful, deliberate, like moving through a memory made of glass. The rifles behind her followed every shift in her body. "Back up," the captain commanded. "Do not block the line of fire." No one moved. The bear took a breath so deep it sounded like the turning of the earth. Its massive shoulders relaxed slightly. Dust curled around its legs like smoke. The girl lowered her hand and spoke. Not loud, not pleading, just a single, steady line. "It's all right." The rangers exchanged shocked glances. The bear's ears flicked, not at the rifles or the yelling, but at her voice. A voice it hadn't heard since it was small enough to fit inside her arms. "I'm telling you, if it moves again..." A ranger started, but the captain raised a hand sharply. "Wait," he said through clenched teeth. "Just wait." The creature's gaze scanned the girl, pausing on the red jacket, the same faded color as the blanket she once wrapped around the shivering cub. She didn't know if the bear remembered, but she remembered everything. She had once sat beside a tiny, trembling creature in a forgotten barn at the edge of the forest, her hands wrapped around a bottle of warm milk. It had been too weak to stand, its small heartbeat frantic under her palm. She remembered whispering, "Breathe, just breathe." And the cub had pressed its head into her arm as if it understood. Now, a full-grown grizzly stood before her, scars hidden beneath thick fur, eyes reflecting something old and wordless. Then, movement. Not from the bear, from the ridge behind it. A blur of motion rippled through the brush. Something else was moving, something watching. The bear's head snapped toward the trees, body rigid once more. A guttural warning rolled from its chest like distant thunder. "What is that?" a ranger muttered. Branches cracked. A shadow dislodged from the tree line, moving low and silent along the ridge. The girl's heartbeat spiked. She recognized that body language in the bear. Protectiveness, not hostility. "It's not here for us," she whispered. "It's tracking something else." The captain's radio crackled to life. "Command to perimeter. We're detecting movement along the north line. Possible second animal. Stay alert." "Second animal," a ranger breathed. "Another bear." No one answered. The bear growled again, but not at the girl. Its attention locked fully on the moving shadow in the distance. "It's warning us," she said quietly. "It doesn't want whatever is back there near this place." The captain frowned. "What are you saying?" She took another step forward, eyes never leaving the bear. "He didn't come here to attack. He came here to get our attention." The bear shifted, weight leaning toward the north ridge. The rangers adjusted their rifles, uncertainty thick in the air. The captain lowered his weapon slightly, eyes narrowing. "Then why stop here?" The girl didn't look away from the tree line. "Because whatever is coming next," she said slowly, voice low and steady, "is worse." A crack cut through the distant ridge, sharp, metallic. Not an animal sound, not a branch. Something man-made. The bear rose slightly onto its hind legs, listening. The girl's breath caught, and deep in the forest, a second echo answered the first. A hollow, rhythmic clank, like metal dragging across stone. The metallic sound echoed again, slow, deliberate, almost mechanical. The kind of noise that doesn't belong in a place carved by wind and claw. A few of the rangers exchanged uneasy glances. The captain lifted his radio. "North Ridge, report. Any movement up there?" Static answered. Then silence. The bear remained upright for a moment longer before dropping back to all fours with a heavy thud. Its head turned sharply, gaze fixed on the tree line where the sound had come from. The girl followed its line of sight, her heartbeat sinking with the tension in the air. One of the younger rangers whispered, "That wasn't an animal." The captain didn't respond. His knuckles were white on the rifle grip. Another clank, closer this time. The bear moved, not toward the humans, but along the fence line, pacing slowly, muscles coiled like a bowstring. Dust collected around its huge paws. It didn't look at the rifles or the shouting men. It looked only at the trees, as if expecting something to emerge. The girl's eyes narrowed. "He's not here to reunite," she said under her breath. "He's here to warn." The captain shot her a sharp look. "Warn about what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she watched the bear's shoulders. Years ago, when the cub was scared, it used to press its head against the ground before danger arrived. A subtle lowering of the neck. She saw that same movement now. The shadow from the ridge moved again, faster this time. The brush parted. Something stepped out. But it wasn't another bear. It was a man, clad in dark hiking gear, his posture too calm for someone who had just stumbled upon a line of armed wildlife officers and a hostile grizzly. He didn't run. He didn't freeze. He walked. Slowly, purposefully. The bear's growl rumbled like rolling thunder. The man stopped just at the tree line, the sun catching a faint glint of metal at his side. A ranger shouted, "Stay where you are!" The man didn't raise his hands. He simply tilted his head slightly, eyes scanning the rifles. The girl, And finally, the bear. The girl felt a cold weight settle in her chest. That look wasn't fear, it was calculation. The captain stepped forward. "Identify yourself." The stranger said nothing. Instead, he glanced toward a metal case strapped to his pack. Long, rectangular, industrial, not the kind of thing carried by casual hikers. The bear shifted, planting itself between the stranger and the fence line. Another ranger muttered, "Why isn't the bear going after him?" Because the bear wasn't confused, it was choosing. A memory flashed behind the girl's eyes of the day wildlife authorities came to take the cub. They weren't gentle. They used poles and restraints, treating the terrified animal like a dangerous thing. It had made that same sound then, the low, rumbling growl that wasn't aggression but warning. The stranger took another step, almost daring the bear to react. The girl took a step too, aligning herself with the animal, her body angled slightly forward. The captain hissed through his teeth, "Get back here." She didn't. Her eyes remained locked on the stranger. "What are you carrying?" The man's lips curled slightly, a smirk, in a place where no one should be smiling. The bear let out a sharp, guttural bellow that shook the air. Gravel skittered down the ridge. Birds burst out of the treetops in a frantic wave. The stranger finally spoke, voice quiet but unnervingly steady. "I'm not here for you." The captain lifted his rifle. "Then who?" The man's eyes flicked past the girl, past the rifles, landing on the bear. "I'm here for him." Before anyone could react, the stranger reached for the metal case. The bear roared, louder this time, primal and resonant. The rangers flinched, safeties disengaging in a chorus of metallic clicks. The girl moved without thinking. And in that heartbeat, caught between rifles, a charging grizzly and a silent man with unknown intent, every soul in the clearing realized that they were no longer in control of what would happen next. Movement blurred. The metal case snapped open. Something inside flashed in the light, and the bear surged forward. The bear's charge was like a thunderclap, sudden, all-consuming. Its muscles coiled and released in one explosive movement, paws tearing at the dirt. Dust flared around its body like smoke rising from impact. The stranger didn't run. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he snapped the metal case fully open. A thin cylinder lay inside, sleek, industrial, fitted with a trigger mechanism and a small antenna. Not a weapon designed for death, a weapon designed for control. A tracking dart launcher. The girl's blood ran cold. The bear closed the distance, claws tearing grooves into the earth. The rangers raised their rifles in a synchronized wave of panic. "Hold fire!" the captain barked, but fear overrode discipline. One ranger fired a warning shot into the dirt. The sound cracked like lightning. The bear didn't stop. The stranger lifted the launcher with unnerving calm. The girl sprinted forward. "No!" she shouted, but her voice was drowned beneath the roar of wind and gunmetal. The stranger took aim at the bear's shoulder, a clean sedation target. The girl stepped directly into his line of fire. He hesitated for one fraction of a second, just long enough. The bear's paw slammed into the ground 10 feet from him, sending a shockwave of dust and stone. The impact echoed through the clearing like a drumbeat. The stranger stumbled backward, barely keeping his footing. The girl stood between them, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Step aside," the stranger said, voice low. "Put it down," she answered. His eyes narrowed. "That animal is marked for relocation." "That animal," she said slowly, "isn't yours." The captain moved in cautiously, rifle still raised but aimed low. "Sir, you're entering controlled wildlife territory. You have no authorization to tranquilize or extract it." The stranger cut him off. "Check your orders, Ranger. Priority specimen, asset code 47B. The captain froze. A murmur spread through the line. The designation wasn't standard for conservation. That kind of tag belonged to something else, something classified. The girl looked between the captain and the stranger, anger and disbelief building behind her eyes. "What did you do to him?" she said. The stranger didn't blink. Tagged as a juvenile anomaly 6 years ago, unique bonding behavior, adaptation under human-influenced rearing, subject escaped capture. We've been tracking him since... "Subject," she repeated, her voice tightening. You don't even call him an animal. The stranger's gaze remained fixed on the bear. He isn't just an animal. He's data. The bear let out a rough, grating sound, like metal dragged across gravel. A sound that wasn't quite a roar, a warning. It circled slightly, placing itself between the girl and the tree line, hackles raised, eyes locked on the stranger. "You're not here to relocate him," she said quietly. "You're here to take him." The stranger adjusted his grip on the launcher. "Relocation, containment, observation, call it what you like." The captain's radio crackled abruptly. "Command to perimeter, urgent advisory. Intel confirms civilian man on site is operating under external contract. Do not engage unless he initiates force." The captain clenched his jaw. External contract. With who? Static, then silence. The stranger's expression didn't change. "How you have your orders?" The girl stepped closer, eyes fierce. "And what happens when you take him? You put him in a cage, run tests on him, call it research." The stranger didn't answer. He didn't need to. The bear took another step forward, a low rumble rolling from deep in its chest. Its gaze never left the metal device in the stranger's hands. Not a dumb animal, a creature that had learned once that humans could hurt and could take. One of the rangers whispered, "It understands." The stranger lowered the launcher slightly, as if considering the risk. "Don't interfere. You don't know what this thing is capable of." "He's capable of remembering," she said. Silence spread like a held breath. Somewhere behind them, a bird cried out sharply, then went quiet. The stranger's finger tightened on the trigger. The bear shifted its weight, ready to spring. And in that razor-thin second suspended between action and consequence, something else moved in the tree line. Not the stranger, not the bear, something bigger. The brush at the edge of the tree line trembled, not from wind, but from mass. Heavy, slow, deliberate. The bear's ears snapped toward the sound, body lowering instinctively into a defensive stance. Its chest rumbled like distant thunder. The stranger pivoted halfway, torn between two threats, one human, one unknown. A ranger squinted at the tree line. "What is that?" The captain didn't answer. His attention flicked rapidly between the grizzly blocking the clearing and the shifting shadows in the forest. The girl didn't move. Her breathing steadied, as if something cold and certain had settled in her bones. Branches cracked. A shape emerged. Massive. Scarred. Older. Another grizzly. This one darker, broader through the shoulders, its fur matted with dust and old wounds. Its eyes were not fixed on the humans. They were locked solely on the first bear, on the one that once knew a girl and a blanket, and a world where humans offered warmth instead of cages. The stranger swore under his breath. Two targets, that complicates things. The metal case in his hand glinted. He adjusted his stance. "Do not fire," the captain warned sharply. "They're going to fight," a ranger muttered. "We need to drive them apart before they—" The girl shook her head once. "No, he knows him." The darker bear stepped fully into the clearing. Its breath rasped through its throat, low and crackling. A long scar cut across its muzzle, an injury that spoke of territory fights, of survival in winters without mercy. The first bear, her bear, shifted sideways, placing himself between the girl and the newcomer, shoulders braced. Head lowered, not aggressive, but ready. The darker bear responded with a snort and a single step forward. Two rangers raised their rifles immediately. "Stop," the captain ordered, voice cold. "No shots unless we have no choice." The darker bear's gaze flicked to the girl only once, briefly, like a question that had no human translation, then back to the one standing guard. The girl's voice was steady. "He didn't come for humans. He came for him." The stranger was already recalculating. Two bears, uncontrolled terrain, trank capacity limited. "Move," he snapped to the girl. "Now." She didn't. The darker bear inhaled deeply. Its chest expanded, ribs rising under coarse fur. Then it exhaled, not in a roar, but a sound closer to a low, guttural huff. A greeting, a challenge, something primal. The first bear answered with a low growl, not directed at the humans or the rifles or the stranger. directed only at the one emerging from the trees. The girl understood. This wasn't aggression. This was territory recognition, hierarchy negotiation, and humans were standing directly in the middle of it. The captain's voice was low. "We need to clear the perimeter. If they clash here, civilians get caught in it." The stranger shook his head. "If they clash, we lose them both." The girl turned slightly, her voice sharp. "You don't lose animals. You lose control." The darker bear took another slow step forward, head angled down, shoulders rolling like boulders shifting beneath earth. The first bear, still between the humans and the tree line, stood firm. A distant memory flickered in her mind. A winter night. A smaller cub, the same one now standing before her, curled beside another, older cub. Two bodies sharing heat in a barn that smelled of hay and dust. Always two, always together. Her eyes widened. "They were siblings," she whispered. No one responded, but the silence acknowledged it. The darker bear's steps were heavy but not hostile. The first bear shifted, chest rising, as if bracing for impact or reunion. The girl took a slow breath. They remember each other. The stranger's jaw tightened. Bonds in wild animals weaken. Instinct takes over. If one perceives the other as a rival. The darker bear stopped within 10 feet. The first bear lowered his head completely to the ground, pressing his snout into the dirt. A gesture of recognition, an old one the girl had seen before, long ago, when two young cubs learned that survival meant standing side by side against the cold. A soft sound escaped the darker bear's throat, low, like something breaking gently instead of violently. The stranger frowned. That wasn't aggression. The captain's grip eased on his rifle. The girl stepped closer to the fence. For a moment, the forest held its breath. Two brothers, pulled apart by human hands and years of survival, stood face to face once more in a clearing between worlds. Then, behind them, the metal case in the stranger's hand beeped, a signal, remote, activated by someone else, not by him. The stranger's eyes widened. Someone else had just entered the game. The beep cut through the clearing like a blade, sharp and sterile against the raw tension of the moment. The stranger looked down at the case, confusion flickering across his face for the first time. He hadn't pressed anything. The activation didn't come from his trigger. Someone else was controlling the signal. The Bear brothers reacted instantly. Both lifted their heads in unison, ears flicking toward the trees, bodies suddenly rigid. The darker one's nostrils flared, catching a scent carried on the shifting wind. The first bear, her bear, shifted his weight back a step, not in fear, but in preparation. The girl felt the change before she understood it. This wasn't just about tranquilizers or forced relocation anymore. Something had been set in motion, something planned. The stranger lifted the case half open in his hand, eyes scanning the tree line. "That wasn't me." The captain frowned. "Meaning what?" The stranger's voice dropped, quiet but clear. "Meaning someone else just armed the secondary unit?" "Secondary what?" a ranger snapped. The girl's breath caught. "Drones." A faint buzzing reached their ears, at first almost indistinguishable from the wind. Then it grew clearer, metallic, mechanical. A swarm approaching from the far ridge. The stranger cursed under his breath. Unauthorized deployment. Someone overrode field protocol. The rangers started repositioning, eyes scanning the skies. The buzzing intensified into a whine, echoing off the steel fence. The girl stepped backward instinctively, her gaze darting between the bears and the sky. Then she saw them. Sleek, matte black drones rising just above the tree line. Small, fast, fitted with tranquilizer rigs and tracking beacons. They moved in formation, gliding like silent birds of iron. The captain's voice hardened. "Whose authority is this?" The stranger wiped a sleeve across his brow. "Not mine." The girl looked at him sharply. "Then whose?" He didn't answer. The bears did not understand drones, but they understood threat. The darker one reared slightly, teeth bared in a low snarl. The first bear positioned himself fully between the girl and the incoming machines, body angled like a shield. The girl's voice came out low. "If they fire, they'll hit both." The stranger snapped open an emergency flare from his belt. "Get back behind the trucks." "No," she said. He stared at her, disbelief edging into anger. "Those drones aren't here to observe. They're here to secure assets. They don't care about battlefield placement. They'll take down anything with a heat signature." The captain stepped forward. "Pull them back. Call it off." "I can't," the stranger replied. "They're slave to remote authorization." The buzzing grew louder, descending. Dust swirled in spirals beneath the downdraft. The rangers adjusted their aim upward. The bears lifted their heads, growling at the sky, fur rippling beneath invisible pressure. The girl felt something deep and heavy settle in her chest. This wasn't just a wildlife encounter, it was an operation. The drones angled downward, targeting sensors locking onto the two massive heat signatures moving across the dirt. "Fire suppression net ready," announced a cold, synthesized voice from one of the drones. Her stomach dropped. A net, a containment system. Once thrown, it would constrict like steel wire. No dart, no sedation. Immediate restraint, designed for capture, not care. The first bear bristled, lowering its body, muscles bunching. The darker bear answered with a deep roar, paws digging trenches into the earth. The girl stepped forward and did something no one expected. She raised both arms toward the drones, not in surrender, but in challenge. "Stop!" she shouted. The captain yelled after her, "Get down!" The stranger watched her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "You think they'll listen to you?" Her voice was steady. "I'm not talking to them." She turned her head slightly. She was talking to the bears. Her words came out quiet, almost breathless. "Don't run." The rangers froze. The drones dropped lower, shadows spreading across the clearing. The first bear turned his head just enough to look at her. The darker one snorted, confused, restless. The girl did not lower her arms. Dust spun around her boots. The buzzing grew louder. The drones aligned. Target locks activated. 3 red beams snapped into place. 2 on the bears, 1 on her. And then, a single rifle fired. The shot cracked through the air like a whip, echoing off the steel fences and stone ridges. The crowd gasped. Drones reacted instantly, sensors flaring with threat detection. The red targeting beams flickered, recalibrating. But the bullet didn't hit the bears. It struck the ground just in front of the girl, spraying gravel across her boots. A ranger stepped forward, rifle still smoking, panic etched across his face. "She was in the firing line. I was warning." "Hold your fire," the captain barked, fury cutting through his voice. "Nobody fires without my order again." But the damage was done. The bears surged, not toward the humans, toward the drones. The first bear, her bear, roared, a sound that shook the clearing to its bones. It wasn't rage, it was warning. Territory claimed, intruders identified. The darker bear answered with a wave of guttural sound, rising onto its hind legs with terrifying force. The drones interpreted the movement as hostility. "Engage restraint protocol," the synthetic voice announced. A metallic snap rang out as one of the drones deployed its containment module, a weighted wire net designed to drop and constrict. The net arced downward like a steel spiderweb aimed at the darker bear. The girl moved before anyone else. She stepped forward, grabbing a fallen branch splintered by gunfire. In one motion, she hurled it upward with all the force she could muster. It struck the net mid-air, tangling briefly. The projectile spun off course, missing the darker bear by inches and slamming into the dirt with a heavy thud. The stranger's eyes widened slightly. "She redirected it." The captain turned to his team. "Do we have override access?" "No," a ranger replied, eyes on the sky. "Once a drone system locks onto a capture sequence, only remote uplink can abort. And that's not us." Another net deployment hissed overhead. This time, the first bear reacted, muscles coiling as it lunged, not toward the net, but toward the drone itself. It swiped at the machine with immense force. Metal screeched. The drone spun violently, stabilizers failing. It crashed into the ground in a tangle of sparks and twisted rotors. The crowd stumbled backward instinctively. The stranger watched with something like grim recognition. He's done that before. The girl's breath caught. They tried to capture him before. The darker bear turned its massive head toward the downed drone, fur bristling, then back toward the sky. The remaining drones shifted position, recalibrating with cold precision. "Deploy secondary restraint," the system voice announced. A hiss of compressed gas fired a second mechanism, this time a cluster of tranquilizer darts designed to blanket an area. The darts shot downward in a wide arc. Time fractured. The girl stepped forward, too fast, too exposed. The bear closest to her moved the moment she did. With a heavy shove, it threw itself sideways, positioning its bulk between her and the falling darts. The tranquilizers struck fur, not skin. Thick muscle absorbed the impact. 2 darts embedded in its shoulder, 1 in its flank. The bear grunted, staggered. Its massive head shook once, fur rippling. A ranger whispered, "It protected her." The stranger adjusted his stance, eyes narrowed. It just made itself a primary target. The tranquilizer wasn't instant, but it was powerful. Sedation would begin within minutes. The bear's breathing changed, deeper now, like a heartbeat slowing against its will. The girl looked up at the drones. "Stop it!" The drones didn't respond. They rotated, recalibrating again, preparing another deployment. The tranquilizer, now in the bear's bloodstream, triggered a cascade of biometric data, exactly what the system was designed for. The stranger looked at the device still in his grip, realization dawning too late. "They're not here to relocate him," he said quietly. The girl stared at him. "Then what?" He exhaled, voice low and flat. "They're here to take him alive. At any cost." The bear swayed. The darker one stepped closer, brushing its muzzle against its brother's side. A silent acknowledgement, a decision forming between them that had nothing to do with humans or drones or contracts. Something moved in their eyes, something like memory. Then, without warning, both bears turned, not to flee, to break through the fence. The fence groaned under the first impact, metal bending with a sharp tearing sound. As the larger bear slammed into it shoulder first, sparks flew where iron scraped against iron. The crowd jolted backward, fear rippling through the line like a shockwave. "Hold positions!" the captain shouted, though his voice wavered. "Do not provoke them!" The first bear, slowed by tranquilizer but still dangerously powerful, pushed his weight against the damaged section, paws grinding into the gravel. The darker bear stayed beside him, bracing the structure with brutal force. Together they weren't running, they were breaking through. The fence shook again. The stranger snapped open the case and pulled a second launcher, sleeker, more compact. His eyes were locked on the injured bear. "If he breaches containment, they'll escalate with lethal..." The girl stepped in front of him, jaw set. "Then stop them." He stared at her. "You think I control this now? You brought them here." For a moment, the stranger hesitated, a crack in his certainty. Then another impact thundered through the metal. The fence posts rattled, bolts tearing loose with a screech. One more hit, and it would buckle completely. The darker bear glanced at his brother, then at the girl. His breathing was steady, too steady for an animal in a panic. Wolves acted in packs, bears didn't. Bears survived alone. But these two, they coordinated like predators that had once shared the same den. "Tranquilizers taking hold," a ranger warned behind the captain. His movements are slowing. The first bear stumbled for just a heartbeat, legs buckling slightly beneath his massive frame. He roared, frustration and defiance rolling out of his chest like thunder trapped in a cage. The girl's breath caught. "He doesn't have long." The darker bear pressed his flank against his brother, holding him steady, preventing him from collapsing. The first bear pushed again, slower this time but with grim determination. Then the tranquilizer hit deeper. A tremor rippled down his front leg. His paw slipped. His head dipped low, breath ragged. A sound escaped him, soft, almost a whine. Something inside the girl shattered. She stepped forward, closer to the fence. One of the rangers moved to restrain her, but the captain raised a hand, stopping him. No one understood why. Maybe even he didn't. But there was something in the way she stood, something that felt less like recklessness and more like witnessing. The darker bear turned then, eyes catching hers through the chain links. For a moment, just a breath, no one moved. The stranger lifted his launcher. The girl spoke quietly. "If you shoot him now..." The stranger didn't answer. You'll teach him that every human he remembers was a mistake, she finished. The launcher remained pointed. The girl didn't blink. Is that the legacy you came here to leave? Silence stretched tight across the clearing. The tranquilized bear swayed again, knees bending. The darker bear pressed against him, shouldering his weight, trying to keep him upright. Two bodies, one failing, one refusing to let it fall. Steel groaned. The fence gave. With a final heave, the darker bear slammed his weight through the panel, ripping it free with a shriek of twisting metal. The barrier buckled inward, collapsing in a shower of dirt and sparks. The crowd screamed. The captain raised his rifle halfway, hand trembling. Hold. The Bear brothers didn't move through the gap. They stood on the threshold, one barely standing, one braced like a shield. The girl took a step toward the breach. Dust hung in the air like smoke. The stranger's finger hovered over the trigger, hesitation flickering like static behind his eyes. Then the sky split. A drone swooped lower, targeting lights resetting, fresh lock acquired. Not on the tranquilized bear, on the darker one. The system voice cut through the chaos, were cold and mechanical. Primary target compromised. Engaging secondary capture. The girl spun toward the sound. The stranger exhaled through his teeth. The darker bear lifted his head, and in that moment, just as the tranquilized bear's legs buckled completely and his massive body began to fold toward the ground, the darker one made his choice. He turned away from freedom and stepped back toward the drones. The darker bear's decision was not instinctual, it was deliberate. He stepped away from the gap in the fence, paws dragging slightly through the dirt. His brother, now heavily sedated, collapsed fully to one side, breathing in slow, labored bursts. The tranquilizer pulsed in his bloodstream like a distant drumbeat, each thud dragging him closer to unconsciousness. The girl watched, her breath caught in her throat. "He's staying," she whispered. The darker bear moved toward the open clearing, toward the approaching drones. The captain's voice cracked slightly. "Why is it doing that?" The stranger didn't look away. "He's diverting the capture protocols. The drones prioritize the biggest heat signature still mobile. When one goes down, they target the one still standing," she finished. The stranger nodded once. "That's how the system works." The girl's jaw clenched. "That's how you built it." The darker bear positioned himself between the sedated one and the oncoming machines, lowering his head, shoulders rising like stone. His fur rippled with tension. He made no move to run, no move to fight. He simply stood, like a wall. The drone hovered lower, thrusters whining, tranquilizer tubes rotating into place with mechanical clicks. The red targeting beam locked onto his chest. A ranger lifted his weapon, voice shaking. "Captain, if the drone fires at that range, it'll hit his heart directly," the captain muttered. "Sedative shock, he won't survive it." The drone's system voice announced flatly, "Optimal trajectory acquired. Deploying restraint and sedation in 5, 4, 3. The girl stepped forward again. She moved faster than she had any right to, all instinct, no hesitation. She grabbed a dropped ranger jacket from the ground and swung it upward like a flare flag. "Hey!" she screamed. The drone's sensors flickered at the sudden movement. Her boots skidded in the dust as she ran, not away, but directly into the drone's line of fire. The stranger swore loudly, "Get her back!" She didn't stop. She threw the jacket upward, hitting the drone's optical array. Fabric whipped across its sensors. The drone jerked in midair, correcting aim. The tranquilizer tubes rotated again, now flicking toward the moving human heat signature instead of the bear. The system voice chirped coldly, "Human interference detected. Redirecting." "No!" the captain shouted. The girl froze, staring up at the drone. 3 feet above her, dart pistons cocked. The darker bear roared and lunged, not at the drone, at her. He slammed his shoulder into her, pushing her sideways with terrifying force. She crashed into the dirt, air punctured from her lungs. Dust exploded around her as she gasped, vision swimming. The drone fired, not darts this time, nets. Metallic wires spread wide, throwing a shadow across the clearing. The net dropped toward both of them. Bear and girl tangled in the same trajectory. The stranger's finger tightened on the manual override trigger, eyes cold. The captain raised his rifle, torn between protecting the civilian and avoiding escalation. The first bear lay immobile, chest rising slowly. The darker bear remained upright over the girl, a wall of muscle and scars and quiet defiance. He didn't move. He didn't try to avoid the net. He stayed exactly where he chose to stand, between her and the world. The net fell. Time slowed. Rifle safeties clicked. A decision had to be made, in one heartbeat. The stranger's voice cut through the air, low and final. Confirm override. His thumb hovered over the secondary trigger, one press away from forcing the drone system to complete the capture sequence and seal both bear and girl inside a containment field. The captain's hands tightened around his rifle. The drone's mechanical voice counted down, locking restraints in 3. The girl looked up through dust and wire shadows, her face streaked with dirt and something like grief. 2. The darker bear's eyes met hers, steady, ancient, unafraid. 1. The word hung in the air like a loaded trigger. 1. The stranger pressed down on the override. A sharp tone sliced through the clearing, followed by the violent snap of metal mechanisms locking into place. The drone's net deployment system hissed, its arms widening to engage final capture mode. The captain raised his rifle. "Don't do it!" The stranger didn't hesitate. "They'll drag them both under if I don't complete containment." "You'll kill them," the girl rasped from the ground. The stranger didn't look at her. Better captured than shot. The drones converged, nets ready to drop. The darker bear didn't move. He braced himself not against the net, but over her, a living shield. Muscles shifted like armor under fur as he lowered his head protectively. Dust spiraled around his paws. His heartbeat thudded like a drum in the stillness. For a moment, the girl saw not a wild animal or a classified asset, but a creature who understood sacrifice. The net dropped. Metal wire sliced the air, casting a lattice of shadows over the dirt. The girl covered her head, bracing for impact. Then something unexpected happened. The darker bear didn't dodge. He rose. With a sudden burst of power, he lunged upward toward the net, meeting it mid-air with a brutal swipe. Steel wires tangled around his paw and shoulder instantly, clinging like a steel web. The net constricted, locking around his limbs, cables groaning as the drone system engaged full tension. The bear snarled, a deep, resonant sound, not of fear, but of defiance. He tore one side of the net free with sheer force, metal fibers snapping like brittle bone. Rangers flinched. The stranger's eyes widened. "That net is reinforced carbon." The bear ripped through another section, muscles straining, blood streaking down his foreleg where wires had cut deep. The drones adjusted again. Secondary injection protocol. Now it was tranquilizer darts, lethal dosage this time, meant to subdue through shock. Multiple channels opened in the drone's chassis, loading a dozen darts in rapid rotation. The girl scrambled to her feet, voice raw. "Stop firing!" Her shout cut through the chaos, but not enough to halt the machines. The stranger took one step forward, launcher raised again, but his eyes weren't on the bear now, they were on her. "You don't understand. If they breach the fence and both go down, the next order is termination." The captain snapped his head toward him. "Termination? You said relocation." The stranger exhaled slowly, jaw tight. "I said what I had clearance to say." The girl's hands clenched into fists. "You lied." Another drone lowered, tranquilizer pods primed. The darker bear tore free of the last section of the net, blood soaking into the dirt. His chest heaved with heavy breath, fur slicked with sweat and dust. He stood motionless now, darts aimed straight at him, his brother unconscious behind him, the girl at his feet. The system voice clicked, target restrained. Preparing injection. Rifles raised, darts aligned. 1 second remained. Then, the tranquilized bear, the one lying in the dirt, moved, slow. Barely more than a twitch. A paw shifted, scraping weakly against the ground. The darker bear didn't turn his head, but his ears flicked back, registering the movement. The girl looked too. The first bear's eyes, half-lidded and clouded by sedative, lifted just enough to see his brother. And then, with a tremor that shook dust from his fur, he tried to stand. It wasn't strength. Sedation had already drained that from him. It was memory. 2 cubs in a barn, 2 bodies surviving winter by leaning into each other when the cold grew too heavy. Now, even drugged and barely conscious, the first bear tried to rise, not to escape, but to stand beside his brother again. The darker bear stepped forward, not to flee, not to fight, to reach him. Darts triggered. Metal hissed through the air. The girl moved. The captain shouted. The stranger's finger froze on the trigger, and everything happened at once. The air split with the sharp hiss of tranquilizer fire. Darts streaked downward like needles of steel and sedative, cutting through dust and sunlight. The darker bear surged forward on instinct, not away from danger but toward his collapsing brother. His massive body collided with the ground beside him just as the first volley struck. 3 darts buried into his shoulder, 2 into his flank, 1 ricocheted off bone with a metallic snap. The impact drove him to one knee, claws carving trenches into the dirt. His breath hitched, one long defiant exhale rattling through his ribcage like wind forcing its way through a cracked door. The sedated bear lifted his head, eyes glassy but searching. The girl stepped into the line of fire again, too close now, too deep inside the engagement zone. The captain shouted, voice cracking with strain, "Stand down! All units, stand down!" The drones didn't care. They required no permission. They only followed signals, and the signal still pulsed. Restrain, acquire, secure. The stranger stared at the drone system, jaw clenched tight. His thumb hovered over the manual abort key, but he hesitated, not from fear of consequences, bro, but from something worse. Doubt. The tranquilized bear tried again to stand. His legs buckled, muscles trembling, but he dragged his body forward inch by inch, closing the space between himself and his brother. The darker bear, darts embedded deep, forced himself upright once more. His sides heaved. Blood dotted the dirt beneath his forelegs. Sedation pulsed like a poison heartbeat through his veins. Still, he stood. The girl's voice shook. They're not attacking. They're trying to reach each other. The captain looked at her, then at the bears, really saw them for the first time. Not as data points, not as threats, as something else. The drones recalibrated. Injecting final dose, the girl screamed, "Stop!" She ran again, faster than before, her boots skidding across rubble as she threw herself toward the sedated bear, toward the place where the darts would land next. The stranger's breath caught. He moved. Not toward the bears, toward the drones. Without waiting for command clearance, he raised the launcher, not at the animals, but at the control drone leading the formation. One shot. Compressed air cracked like thunder. The dart didn't pierce the drone. It struck its stabilizer pod, knocking the system off balance. Sparks burst from its side. The drone jerked violently, spinning out of formation. The others hesitated, their targeting systems flickering in confusion without a lead node. Control fractured. The darker bear took 3 staggering steps and reached his brother at last. He pressed his forehead against him, a low rumble resonating deep in his chest. Not a threat, a vow. To stand, even if only one could remain standing. The girl stumbled to her knees beside them. Her hands trembled as she touched the sedated bear's fur. The same fur she once brushed clean with a rag when he was small enough to fit in her lap. Behind her, rifles wavered between targets, protocol against instinct. The captain lowered his weapon first. Then, one by one, the others followed. Dust settled slowly around them like ash after a fire. For a moment, even the drones paused, hovering in uncertain silence, rotors humming like distant wasps. The stranger held his breath, launcher still aimed at the sky. Beside him, the control unit sparked again, metal glinting in the sun, voice restarting. "Command uplink interrupted. Awaiting new directive." The captain raised his radio slowly. His thumb hovered over his own transmit key, caught between 2 choices: file the report as protocol demanded, or break it completely. The girl looked up at him, eyes fierce, steady. The darker bear lowered his massive head beside his brother and did not move again. Wind swept across the clearing, carrying dust, blood, and the scent of pine. The drone lights flickered once, then twice, then locked back into ready position. "Awaiting directive," the cold voice repeated. Everything held still. Captain, stranger, drones, rifles. Two bears locked in the last act of a bond forged long before this moment, and one girl who stood between worlds, human and wild, waiting to see which one would break first. The clearing felt suspended in a breath that refused to release. Dust drifted in the air like slow-falling embers. The drones hovered in place, targeting lights flickering but not yet firing. Every heartbeat in the perimeter synced to that rhythmic hum, waiting for one voice, one command. The captain stood motionless, his radio still in hand. "Command uplink awaiting directive," the drone repeated, tone flat and emotionless. The stranger slowly lowered his weapon. His expression, once cold and clinical, shifted, tightening around the edges with something that looked almost like guilt. The tranquilized bear's breathing grew shallow, his massive chest rising with effort. The darker bear stood guard, blood lining his shoulder where the net wires had cut him. His eyes never left the sky. He knew the machines were still seconds away from striking. He knew they would not stop. The girl placed one hand on the tranquilized bear's fur, grounding herself. She spoke, not to the captain, not to the stranger, but to the only creature who seemed to understand. "You held on," she whispered. The darker bear's ears flicked. The captain raised his radio halfway. Every ranger tensed. He could say one word, "Engage," and the drones would fire. Tranquilizer or not, the sedative shock from a full barrage would stop both bears' hearts within minutes. He could also say stand down and break every protocol he had ever sworn to uphold. The drone's lights brightened, target lock re-engaging. The system voice spoke again. "Secondary sedation protocol activating. Confirm." The girl looked directly at the captain. "If you give that order, they die. Not just the bodies. What they are." A beat of silence, her voice lowered. "You'll kill the only thing left in them that trusted us." The stranger turned his head slightly at that, his jaw clenched. The captain looked between the girl and the bears, breath tight in his lungs. Years of training lived behind his eyes. Orders, liability, control. Words stamped into him through repetition, but nothing in his training had prepared him for the sight of two apex predators refusing to abandon each other, even at the cost of freedom, even at the edge of death. The drone spoke again, sharper this time. "Confirm." The captain's radio clicked on. His eyes stayed on the girl, then shifted to the bear who stood, trembling but unbroken, beside his fallen brother. His voice came out low, steady. "Negative," he said. The drone paused. The stranger blinked. "What did you just—" The captain raised his voice. "Full stand down. All units. That's an order." Silence. Then, the drones retracted their data rays with a mechanical snap. The targeting lights powered down, beams fading from red to dark. A collective breath escaped the rangers like a wave. The drone's system voice announced calmly, "Field engagement suspended, awaiting secondary directive." The stranger stared, stunned. "You just compromised a federal containment directive." The captain lowered his radio. "No," he said quietly. "I just refused to shoot something that's not attacking." One of the younger rangers exhaled, shoulders sagging. The rifles went down, muzzles lowering toward the dirt one by one. The darker bear stood perfectly still, muscles locked, waiting for the machines to move again. The girl touched the tranquilized bear's face gently. "He's breathing. He's still with us." The stranger looked at her hand laid across the bear's muzzle, the same gesture she once used on a frightened cub. He swallowed, something shifting behind his expression, a fracture in the armor. "Without full capture," he said slowly, "the system will classify this as a failed extraction. In 12 minutes, remote command will send kill authorization." She looked up sharply. "Then stop it." "I can't," he said. "The override's not in this unit. It's uplinked from a control hub off-site." "Then we get them out," she said. The captain looked at her. "You're talking about moving 2 sedated grizzlies out of a federal perimeter in under 10 minutes. She met his stare. "Yes." Dust rolled across the clearing like a slow tide. The darker bear shifted his weight. The first bear exhaled weakly, head dropping back into the dirt. And in that heavy, silent moment, caught between protocol and choice, the question hung over them like smoke. Would humans step aside or stand with them? For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the shallow, uneven breath of the sedated bear, each exhale brushing against the dirt like a fading heartbeat. The sun hung low above the trees, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground like dark fingers, trying to pull everything back into conflict. The drones hovered, their rotors whispering in a steady, calculated rhythm, artificial, emotionless, waiting for permission to kill or stand down. One of them recalibrated its lenses with a soft clicking sound, its red sensor light flickering across the darker bear's blood-streaked fur. The bear didn't flinch. He simply shifted his stance, planting his paws more firmly beside his fallen brother, muscles rigid, head lowered like a shield refusing to break. A ranger near the back swallowed hard. His finger rested against his trigger, knuckle white beneath the glove. He wasn't aiming anymore, but he hadn't lowered his rifle completely either. Training still held him there, caught in the space between obedience and conscience. The girl's hand stayed on the tranquilized bear's muzzle, her thumb moving lightly across his fur in a slow, steady motion, not comforting him, reminding herself. The stranger glanced at the countdown screen flickering on the side of the drone control module strapped to his arm. 11 minutes. A soft alarm tone pulsed under the surface, unheard by most, but clear to him. If the uplink re-engages, he said quietly, almost to himself, they won't wait for another order. The captain didn't turn. His eyes stayed fixed on the bears. Then we make sure they don't get the chance. The wind shifted then, carrying the scent of pine and iron and dust across the clearing. Drone lights continued to pulse, stuck in standby, waiting for someone, anyone, to tip the moment back into violence. No one spoke, no one moved. But something had already changed. The clearing shifted from chaos into a tense, focused calm. Every ranger held their breath, not in fear now, but in a kind of awe. The tranquilized bear lay motionless except for the slow rise of his chest. Sedative still worked through his blood, time slipping away like water through fingers. The darker bear remained upright, swaying slightly from his own dosage of tranquilizer. His steps were slower now, heavy, but he refused to lie down. He stood over his brother like a final sentry holding the line. The captain lowered his rifle to the ground. "Evac route," he said quietly. "North access slope has no surveillance drone grid from this angle. The ridge blocks the uplink signal." The stranger turned to him in disbelief. "You're going to help her move 2 bears through a restricted perimeter?" The captain looked at the girl, then at the 2 animals. "They're not assets," he said. "Not today." The girl didn't waste a second. She knelt beside the tranquilized bear and ran her hands along his flank, checking for dart entry. "We need to support his head. If sedative hits too deep, he could asphyxiate on his own weight." The stranger, still holding his disabled launcher, hesitated, torn between duty and the quiet, relentless pull of something more human. Then he slung the launcher to his side and stepped forward. "Trank dose was heavy," he said, "but if we keep him moving and keep his airway open, he'll stay stable enough." The girl met his eyes for a moment. There was no forgiveness in her expression, but there was something like recognition. The captain signaled 2 rangers to approach without weapons raised. Slowly, they moved in, carefully positioning themselves near the bear's shoulders. The darker bear growled low, instinct flaring again. The girl placed one hand on his fur. "Easy," she whispered. "We're taking him home." Home. Not a cage, not a lab, not a tag in a system. The word lingered in the air like a promise. The darker bear's head lowered slightly. Not surrender, but trust. The rangers worked quickly. Using heavy webbing normally reserved for fallen trees, they slid it beneath the sedated bear's torso, using leverage rather than force. The girl stayed at the head, fingers constantly monitoring his breath. Every few seconds, she whispered something, soft, steady. Words meant more for the animal than the humans around her. The darker bear walked beside them, step for step, his head lowered to the level of his brother's muzzle. Each time the tranquilized bear's breath hitched, the darker one made a soft throat sound, a vibration more felt than heard, a sound of presence, of memory. Together, bear, girl, rangers, they moved. Slowly across the broken fence, up the north ridge, away from drone surveillance, away from protocol. The stranger followed behind them, silent, no weapon in hand. From the ridge, the forest opened wide, tall pines casting long shadows across the slope. The world felt quieter here, the air thicker with the scent of pine sap and soil. The girl paused only when the tranquilized bear's breathing evened out into a slow, steady rhythm. She placed her forehead briefly against his. "You made it," she whispered. The darker bear stood just behind her, watching with solemn eyes. In the distance, far beyond the perimeter, drone lights flickered, searching the empty clearing for targets that were no longer there. The captain stood at the fence, watching them disappear into the trees. He didn't say a word. The stranger finally spoke, voice low, almost reluctant. "You know, once they're deep enough in the forest," he said, "no one will be able to track them again." She didn't look back. "That," she said, "is the point." A long silence passed between them before he finally nodded once. Then he turned away, his expression unreadable. At the crest of the ridge, the girl walked with one hand gently resting on the darker bear's shoulder. The tranquilized one was carried behind them, still breathing, still fighting to wake. The forest took them back, not as prisoners, not as subjects, but as something else entirely, something free. As the sun dipped behind the ridge and the forest swallowed their silhouettes, silence returned to the clearing, but nothing felt the same. Two bears, bound not by instinct, but by memory. A girl who chose loyalty over fear, and a world that had just witnessed something it could no longer categorize. Some say the forest keeps its own kind of justice, others believe it remembers the ones who chose mercy. But one question still lingers in the dust where it all began. What happens when the world tries to take them back? If you want to see how far someone will go to protect a promise made in childhood, if you believe some bonds were never meant to be broken, stay with us. There's another chapter waiting in the trees. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us for the next story. Because out here, survival isn't just about strength. It's about who stands with you when the world turns against you.